Okay. This is sad. I mean, like, I don't know, guys. So this is not going to be a clip that's easy to sit through, I guess, if you are like me and you want Bernie Sanders to be more vocal than he has been on Israel's genocide. We've spoken about this many, many, many times, but just a refresher, it is not, in my opinion, in dispute. There is a international legal definition of genocide. There are 5 separate planks under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, and you just have to meet one of those for a genocide to be the definition of what the military action is or what the killing is. Israel meets 4 of those easily and many times over. And in history, this will be recorded as the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. It's imperative to call it that when it's happening, because we've abstracted genocide so much from like the practical realities of what militaries do, including like militaries that we've enabled, the United States, after the Holocaust. And the West has confined the term genocide to just the Holocaust, when there have been many genocides perpetrated by governments throughout history, and the Holocaust was unimaginable in scope, but also confined to Europe as opposed to the other genocides that we funded in the global South or around the world. So, or
formed ourselves out of.
Yes, and the United States was formed on the genocide of the Native American population. So, like, democratizing this term and having people understand it also means we can be more critical of governments and evolve past settler colonialism, curate a collective understanding of what the death toll of imperialism and colonialism really looks like, and begin to build a better world while also identifying what is happening to Palestinians in this moment. And Bernie Sanders has repeatedly refused to call for a ceasefire. He has said much of the right things in absence of that, and has been at the forefront of pushing to not at first condition military aid to Israel, and now he's outright saying no more to Netanyahu. And that's good, but it's insufficient. And I do think that this exposes some real limitations. I think that a lot of older Democrats are bumping up against, even when they have the right stuff and the right humanity. There's an unwillingness to really see this for what it is. And this was some questioning done here by Novara News' Ash Sarkar.
Well, the title, first off, the title is "The Bernie Clip is Hard to Watch." That's the title of this clip from Majority Report. And 2 things. One, the funny part, you know that voice on Majority Report who at one point I gave them the honor of the dumbest person in politics, and I was like, it's that person who always talking off screen on the Majority Report. That's him. Now, all of you may have seen it before. This is the first time I've seen the person who I labeled the dumbest person. And believe me, it wasn't based off of how he looked. It was based off purely what he said, because I gave him that award when I did not know what he looked like. But when I see what he looks like, I'm not surprised. That pretty lines up with what the words that were coming out of his mouth. You can take it for what it is. I don't care if you take that as an insult. But let's get back to the video, and the content of the video at least, because it's a coping session for social democrats. Anytime anytime that Bernie Sanders does a bunch of shit that they never comment about, like you can go through RBN's catalog of many times the things that Bernie Sanders did, you can count probably in the teens is where I would put it. They may be at 2. This might be 2. And in order to reach the level to where they even count it, you notice it has to even be a genocide. And they're devastated. And they have been devastated. And it's just a critique. It's so weird how The professional managerial class's critiques do not come with consequences. They don't go, Joe Biden is committing a genocide, so I'm not going to support him. That's the consequence. They just go, Joe Biden is committing a genocide. Period. Then they start talking about something else. That's literally what happens. It never, their analysis, even if it's spot on, as what she's talking about right here, it never, don't matter how good the analysis, it never leads them to actually doing anything tangible, which I find funny. But let's finish out this clip here. Then we're going to get to a Glenn Greenwald clip that kind of breaks down a news article also from the New York Times. And since I'm pay blocked, I want to use Glenn Greenwald. So let's listen to a little more of this video.
And I've seen her briefly, but you're a little more familiar with British politics than myself, Matt. What's she asked some really great questions here, but what's her background?
I mean, she's just a Navarre presenter. People might remember her. She was the one who famously said to Piers Morgan, I believe, like, why are you expecting me to, I think, defend Obama? I'm a communist, you idiot. She's good. And I think this question is good here. I'll just say, like, so there's two capacities Bernie Sanders has. One is as a power broker in the Senate, and the other as a movement leader. As a power broker in the Senate, the stuff about...
As a power broker in the Senate and one as a movement leader. Those are comical. Power broker. The professional managerial class just throws around words, and they use words where what they're describing does not reach the threshold to use the word. Power broker? Bernie Sanders. That's a little heavy, don't you think? But that's one of the capacities. And then let's listen to Matt explain the two capacities of Bernie Sanders, movement leader and power broker. And I would say he's an F at both. Movement leader, he's definitely an F. He left our revolution in the movement, but alone. High and dry, I should say.
Me too. I think defend Obama. I'm a communist, you idiot. She's good. And I think this question is good here. I'll just say, like, so there's two capacities Bernie Sanders has. One is as a power broker in the Senate, and the other as a movement leader. As a power broker in the Senate, the stuff about trying to slow down or stop funding or condition aid, that sort of stuff, is all great. And he's probably, the best in the Senate at that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The problem is that as a movement leader, he is being actively harmful by undermining the calls for ceasefire, by undermining the term genocide. That is harm being done. And so he needs to.
Did you hear what he just said here about Bernie Sanders? He says Bernie Sanders is not neutral on this issue. You are doing active harm. Isn't that the same thing we say about Bernie Sanders? Isn't that the exact critique that RBN, in particular, Nick, has been saying for this long time? 1 second. That call drop out. Just astonishing, because that is the very point. When we say Bernie Sanders is shielding for Joe Biden, he is making people believe socialists is this. That's harm being done. That's the very point that we make. When Bernie Sanders shields for war and becomes the biggest war pig and war supporter, especially when, remember, with Ukraine, that's harm being done. That is not simply, oh, he just has a different opinion. No. But it's funny that in this instance, when they're to the left of Bernie and they're willing to come out and say it, they find the same reasoning that we do. for Bernie Sanders and a lot other items here. But let him finish out his point.
In order to make up for that harm that he's actively doing right now, and we'll watch this in a second, he needs to actually accomplish something with the Senate power broker stuff. And I don't think he's accomplishing enough, in my view.
Yes.
And so, like,
and I think he's too sentimental about his relationship with Biden historically. I think
and
that
probably
they have
Israel too.
He has a friend. Yes. And he has a friendly relationship with Biden that he has based, I think, a lot of some of his less aggressive actions on that is not bearing fruit. So there we go.
And so that's the tragedy of this moment.
In your view.
Now, we don't, the reason I'm going to skip over what he actually says, because we're going to actually revisit it during Glenn Greenwald's. So I don't want to double dip on the video and get us too burnt out on the actual video. Let's get back to their commentary after playing the video. Then we get to the Glenn Greenwald video.
Atrocity, or say to legal definitions about bigotry or about hate crimes. Like, we can argue about any definition, but we shouldn't. And then the question about South Africa was what I was thinking, and he got uncomfortable because
he stepped on a rake. He said, well, it's apartheid.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, it is. Right, exactly. It's quite analogous.
And the thing is look, I read Robert Caro's entire series on LBJ. I'm down for a bit of Senate power broker action. Stay off media. Stop commenting on it. Stay off Twitter. Do your work. Because this sort of thing where you are undermining BDS, saying do what you want to do, or do what you want to do, call it genocide. Like, no, these are actually like the movements that championed you, Bernie. Like,
okay, so
and where's that punch pulled? Like, I
right.
Pull that punch when you're negotiating.
Think about what they're doing. Two things. They're labeling him a movement leader. What movement leader refuses to define anything? Movement leaders run to the mic so they can give their definition as the representative of a group or a movement. You run to the mic. This is what our movement thinks of this. But he's a movement leader. It is just, I wonder if in the 60s, 70s, 50s, during civil rights era, I wonder if they had the same issue with white moderates using the same language, even though they don't use it, they don't mean it in the same way. The ability to, like, you know what I mean? Like when Marianne Williamson said revolution at the ballot box, we were like, what? Revolution at the ballot box. It is just this cartoon-like use of words that they have no business like using at the time. Anyway, I think I belabored the point. Let's just get to this. Let's get to the Glenn Greenwald video. If I maybe I'll come back and listen. I think we've listened to those two enough. But let's get to the Glenn Greenwald video. His video is titled "Coward and Fraud." Bernie confronted on Israel support. If you want to look up the video on YouTube for Glenn Greenwald, that we're going to watch a little bit of it. And we're going to let this video show the Bernie video. So if you haven't seen the Bernie video, which I'm sure most of you who are watching right now have, but if you haven't, you will now get a chance to see that in this video here. Let's watch.
Bernie Sanders is probably the person I find most loathsome in all of this. Because, as I said, one thing you cannot criticize the Israelis for is that you cannot say they hid their intentions about what they were going to do in Gaza. They were very clear about what they intended to do, which was destroy Gaza. And when it mattered, and when it was hard, believe me, to stand up and oppose what the Israelis were doing in Gaza, to oppose the United States support for it in October and November when it actually mattered. Bernie Sanders was running around defending Israel, opposing a ceasefire, insisting that the Israelis were acting properly, and defending Biden for arming and financing Israel. And Bernie Sanders has begun to change his rhetoric solely because there are polls showing that the Biden administration is endangered by anger over the left. In fact, anger over the left, including against Bernie Sanders. Here from the New York Times, you see an article November 30th on Israel's war against Hamas. Sanders faces a backlash from the left. The progressive disappointment with the Vermont senator, a liberal icon, reflects a broader divide among Democrats over the war. And it talks about how Biden's reelection can be
so fucking
imperiled
terrible.
if this continues for so long. And the anger of Bernie Sanders was because when it mattered, when it was hard to stand up and oppose what Israel was doing, the emotions around October 7th were very high. And anyone who did it suffered a significant cost. I can assure you, Bernie Sanders was cheering Israel on. And only in the last 2 months, when he knows it doesn't matter, when the Democratic Party needs him to show angry liberals and angry leftists and angry young people that there's still a home for them in the Democratic Party, because Bernie Sanders is also angry with Israel, only then did he become willing to criticize what Israel was doing. And even
think about what Glenn says here in the way that Bernie Sanders is being used by the establishment. Bernie Sanders was restricted from any sort of good rhetoric, positive rhetoric towards the Palestinians in the very first time when it's very first popped off after October 7th. He was adamant, just like this article describes. And then they bring him in a room. Hey, Bernie, all those people are disaffected. So we need somebody on our team shouting what they're shouting. Can you go out and go do that? Can you be the bait for those people and try to bring them back, Bernie? You are now released. You can go now say good things about Palestinians and all this stuff. But he still won't say ceasefire. That's still a bridge too far, because I think he's walking the line of I have a job to do for the Biden campaign, but I can't go too far as to piss off AIPAC. And that's the line Bernie Sanders, the lane, this milquetoast is even pseudo left, pseudo liberal, but definite neocon and war pig. He knows he's being used in a way as to pacify some Palestinian supporters. You know, they just go through the motions. Like what he's doing now will be good enough for the humanist reports, the majority reports, you know, the Emmas, the Sam Cedars, the Mike Fred, for all of them to be like, look, he went through the motions, he checked off the box, all right, we can support. But just think about how Bernie Sanders is not a unwilling participant. So don't think, you know, he looks so sad and like he's being duped. He is playing that role. He is supposed to look pitiful. Why is he still an independent? How are you an independent and you're this intertwined with the Democratic Party that you're willing to go out and lie for them?
Even then, he's doing it in the most mealy-mouthed way possible.
I'm going to rewind it about 5 seconds here.
Even then, he's doing it in the most mealy-mouthed way possible. Here is a remarkable interview, and I want to credit the journalist. It's Ashkara from Navarra Media, who did a great job in trying to press Bernie Sanders, who's in the UK, on exactly what his position is. And you tell me whether you think, again, he's definitely willing to criticize Israel, now
been
that it
given
doesn't matter anymore that he needs to do so
Right.
politically.
He's been
But just
given that
listen to
lane.
how he refuses to give his real opinion on any of the questions she's asking.
In addition to stopping the billions of dollars in military aid that Israel gets from the United States every year, would you back calls for a cultural, sporting, and economic boycott of Israel?
I am nervous about economic boycotts of any country, to be honest with you.
Now, that is an absolute lie. The United States has an economic boycott of all kinds of countries, of Cuba, of Venezuela, of Syria. And Bernie Sanders supports all of those. He's not opposed to economic boycotts of countries. Let's go on.
But right now, what people want to do, they can do what they want to do. But right now, again, my job as a United States Senator, and I'm kind of leading that effort in this.
Think about that. The point that Glenn, I thought he was going to say a little more. For whatever reason, I thought he said more at that point. Think about what Glenn says here. I am going to rewind it. Excuse me. Think about this.
Yeah. And Bernie
I'm
Sanders.
sorry. So let me say it a different way. Bernie Sanders is fine with economic boycotts like sanctions, or not even those aren't boycotts. He's fine with economic sort of punishment. That's the best way I guess I could say it. He's fine with economic punishment. So when he says here, I stay away from that sort of economic ties or economic punishment of countries. I'm not really into that, because boycotting a country, that's economic punishment. But he signs up for all the sanctions, or for most of the sanctions. I'm not going to say, oh, that's a lie, because he does not. This is social democracy. You give up your key when it comes to foreign policy to the establishment, and you say, I just follow along whatever you like me to do. And then you push all of these sort of domestic policies that you too, even those policies, are not going to be pushed through the Democratic Party. So think about what he's doing. He's pushing for two things, one of which is never going to happen and is never happening. All the things that are progressive, and then he's pushing for war, but those things go through. So who is really Bernie Sanders here? If the things that you participate in government, all the things that reach the finish line are all bad shit, and all the stuff that you work on that's supposedly all the good shit, somehow they never reach the finish line, not even a halfway point. That's Bernie.
Sanders supports all of those. He's not opposed to economic boycotts of countries. Let's go on.
But right now, what people want to do, they can do what they want to do. But right now, again, my job as a United States Senator, and I'm kind of leading that effort in the Senate, is to tell Netanyahu that he is not going to get any more U.S. aid.
Did you feel nervous about the boycott movement against apartheid South Africa? Was that a concern you had at the time?
What I thought that
So that's a good question.
That question right there was debilitating. If this was a conversation in person, she just walked up to Bernie Sanders and with a freaking bat hit him on the knee, like, bah, nigga, what? And now answer the question. He's hobbled here. Because there's a lot of historical history, Bernie Sanders, on your stances when it comes to South Africa. So this is a brilliant question by this young journalist who says, okay, you're a little iffy with this economic boycott. You want to stay away from that. How did you feel about South Africa's? Then he starts babbling, So I'll rewind it a little bit and let it play out here. I'll try to let it play a little more instead of a comment.
Not going to get any more U.S. aid.
Did you feel nervous about the boycott movement against apartheid South Africa? Was that a concern you had at the time?
What I thought that as a
So that's a good question as well.
That is a great question.
One of the things that took down the apartheid regime of South Africa in the 1980s was exactly the kind of economic boycott Bernie Sanders just said he's unwilling to support. So she asked him, well, what about your views of South Africa and the boycott against apartheid South Africa that was called for by the Black people of South Africa trying to end apartheid? Were you also against that on this principle of yours that you don't support boycotts? And here's what he said.
what I thought that as an apartheid state at that point, it was important to put pressure. But people can do as they want, and that's all.
Do you think that it's right?
Did you
that
hear that
British
freaking coward ass shit? Listen to how weak and feeble, intellectually feeble this guy sounds. Apartheid, but yeah, people can do what they want. That's him acknowledging, I understand I am a hypocrite. So I'm saying, go ahead and do what you want. If you go ahead and say apartheid and all this other stuff for genocide, I'm not going to fight against you. Have you ever seen this sort of cowardice on screen by somebody? He looks ridiculous. I gotta rewind this back. It is just astonishing. This is Bernie Sanders, movement leader. This is the movement leader, people.
What I thought that as an apartheid state at that point, it was important to put pressure. But people can do as they want, and that's all.
Do you think
he gave up? He said that's a person realizing I sound like a freaking imbecile. I'm going to stop talking. That's it. And that's what he did. Because he stopped mid-sentence before he finished that second. Then he began another sentence. And he just stopped. And he said, okay, that's all. Boy, he looks pitiful. Pitiful. So let's continue.
I think that it's right that British citizens and American citizens can go and fight in the IDF when, as you say, there are such profound humanitarian concerns in Gaza?
Well, I think if British and American people want to do that, I suppose they have the right to do it. It's not something that I...
Now,
Bernie
that is not a universal
terrible.
right. You don't have the right to go and fight in the Russian army,
Bernie is
or to go fight in the
terrible.
Syrian
He is
army, or to go
terrible.
fight in the Iranian army. That will be treason. You will get charged with treason if you do that. But Bernie Sanders saying, but for Israel, yeah, if you want to go fight for Israel, as a lot of Americans do, people make a big point of the fact that among the hostages taken by Hamas on October 7th were Americans. That's because a lot of Americans go and fight in the Israeli army. And there may have been some hostages who were just visiting. There were hostages representing, I think, 9 or 10 nations, including Thailand and Brazil and other countries. But big reason why there's so many Americans in Israel is because Americans go and fight for the Israeli Defense Force, something you're allowed to do, even though you're not allowed to do that for every other country.
really thought a whole lot about.
Do you think they should have the right?
Look, I think what the Israeli government doing now is horrible, and I'm not quite sure why people would want to be, part of that effort.
She then tried to ask him several times as well, would you say that Israel is guilty of genocide? And he, as he's done many times before, has refused to give an answer. Now, as I said earlier, that for the first 2 months, Bernie Sanders was singing a much different tune. Here he was on Face the Nation in December of 2023, about exactly 2 months
Glenn is
after the
destroying
October
him
7th
right
attack.
now.
And he was
Go
asked
ahead,
about
Glenn.
whether he supports a ceasefire in Gaza. By this point, something like 10,000 Palestinians had been killed, many thousands of children. And here's what the socialist senator, the independent senator from Vermont said.
In terms of a permanent ceasefire, I don't know how you could have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel they want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
Now, Bernie Sanders got a lot of support for saying that, including from the biggest
AIPAC.
pro-Israel activist group, AIPAC, which promptly went to Twitter and said, "Thank you, Senator Sanders, for your strong opposition to a permanent ceasefire with Hamas." There are people who from the start opposed the Israeli war in Gaza and U.S. support for that war, and who still do. And then there are people who supported the Israeli war in Gaza. I know a lot of people in my life who did that and still do. And on some level, I can at least respect the intellectual consistency of that. People in my life said, look, what happened on October 7th is an absolute atrocity. No country can allow that to happen. And whatever Israel needs to do to go prevent that from happening again, I support that. And those people have continued to this very day to maintain that principle. What Bernie Sanders and so many other Western liberals did was stand up when it was so politically cheap to do so, when it took courage not to do it, and stood up and applauded the Israelis and said, we support the right of the Israelis to go in Gaza and do what they want to do. Knowing that the Israelis would do exactly this because Israel said it would. And now what's happening is two things. One is there's the political need for Bernie Sanders to now suddenly change his tune.
Political
so we can try and
need.
attract the young voters and the
Exactly.
left-wing voters who once idolized him so he can lead them to go vote for Joe Biden.
This is a political need from Bernie Sanders to make even this slight pivot. It is a political need because if Bernie Sanders, the most left person in politics, in the blue-red game, the most publicly seen left person is on the side of the neoliberals, how is he going to attract? How is he going to be used as bait to get all the non-establishment people like he's used every cycle?